If you fear aging, you must find something to place value upon that time cannot rip away. One day you will see those beautiful, beautiful boys in the club, only now they'll be too young to touch. There will never be another boy in your life who looks like you stole him directly off a runway. Single is lonely, single is boring, but at least you'll never have to look at the love of your life and see the open contempt. Placing any value at all upon your looks is a doomed conquest, and if that's where you place all your value, then you, my friend, are fucked. For that brief spell of time, there's nothing but the road and the night and the music. You could very well be 20-something still, immortal, because in the darkness of the night, no one can see the lines on your face. You're just a floating brain, an experience in a jar, nothing more, nothing less. So hello, you wonderful citizen of cyberspace, and welcome to a bit of a storytime waffle about aging, given I'll be turning 40 in April. And while that's not really like that old as things go, it's weird and sad and beautiful and actually not that acute, the aging fear on the cusp of 40, compared to how I felt in my 20s. I think your 20s, in fact, are the decade when you're the most hung up on aging, though I do suspect that once I hit roughly 50 and there's no hiding my age and my bones are hurting enough to seriously interfere with doing the things I love, I think the fear and hatred of aging will bite once again. But for now, I wanted to give you a bit of a waffle and maybe some advice on surviving that aging terror stage we all go through when we're too young to really need to fear it, but it's like a fear of the unknown, I think. Because obviously when you're young, all you know about aging are the things you're going to lose, namely your looks and your young relevant status and all of this stuff. You know what you're going to lose and it's a big loss, but you don't know any of the things you're going to gain until you get there and you gain them, because the things you gain are all a big surprise, whereas the things you lose are very predictable and scary, I think. So your 20s, I reckon, is where we have to start. I actually have the paralyzing, ridiculously premature phobia of aging to thank for the fact that I write at all. There were two emotions that first spurred me to write. One being the crushing disappointment of living a basically sober life once I quit ecstasy, and everything suddenly seemed so dull and fruitless and empty to its core. And the second emotion was the paralyzing terror of getting older. I feared it, see, because I valued nothing else about myself besides what I looked like, which I think is quite a common problem in youth, especially if you're born female. I didn't write yet, I didn't YouTube, I certainly didn't make music or think I ever would, so my life really had no centerpin. And I had no self-belief in anything besides the fact I was reasonably pretty. The only reason I had friends at all, for starters, was that I'd gone out to goth clubs alone, scantily clad, and waited for boys to talk to me. Then I got myself adopted into their friendship groups, et voila, I had friends. But a word to the wise, this is not a lasting solution. Like, I know if you're autistic and you're very bad at making friends, but you're female and you have pretty privilege, it's quite easy to make friends by just going out looking cute and waiting for boys to come to you, and then you have someone to talk to. And that was always my MO. I don't recommend it, because unless you nail down one of those boys, cement yourself, become permanent, and I mean married, an ex-girlfriend will be tolerated by the friendship group for a good few years if you play your cards right, but eventually, even if it's 16 years down the line, you will find yourself replaced, devalued, and utterly alone. But I suppose that's getting rather ahead of ourselves. In my 20s, if I wanted someone, I was like absolutely cocksure of my ability to reel them in. At any club, I would be minimally dressed, and though I'm grey asexual, so attracted to almost no one, like literally I can go years and years and years without seeing a single person I fancy, and it's so boring. When it came to the rare few guys I did deem worthy of approaching, I was never entirely turned down, unless they were taken, or unless all I could get was a half measure like fuck buddies but no relationship. I never got a flat fuck off. Even the married ones sometimes passed a lovely hour of flirtation. And I don't say all this to be vain, though it probably sounds it. I say this to exemplify the fact that I was acutely aware that everything I valued about myself was on a clock. A clock that was ticking down, down, down to the doomsday hour, and then there would be absolutely nothing of worth left. I would be a wrinkled husk that didn't even rattle, no seeds inside, no substance at all. In the first draft of the first manuscript I ever wrote, my 26-year-old main character, who was, of course, basically me, she stated with despair and disgust that she was on the verge of becoming the old bitch in the club. Yeah, I know. Horrible internalized misogyny and rampant ageism. What else do you expect from a vain, vapid 20-something in the year 2011? I read back that sentence now and just pity its author. 26 still has, in my opinion, at the very least, a full decade to stomp and twerk before old bitch ghosts into view as a threatening descriptor. But nonetheless, it's how I felt. So I started writing about vampires, creatures who never had to age. That was the big appeal for me with vampires. It was the eternal youth thing, because I so feared and hated the idea of getting older. I just wanted to stay young, stay myself, not change, all that stuff. So this story, it was really just a rambling wish fulfillment piece, that first draft. A girl every bit as bored stupid of the empty, listless, depressing reality she inhabits, has her world turned upside down by a group of immortals who, for God knows what reason, adopt her specifically into their midst, end up turning her, and from there on out, she's young forever. And there's moonlight and drugs and neon and sex and excitement and travel and fucking acceptance. Above all things, that. An immortal lover and an immortal family who'll never die or change or abandon her. And life will never, ever be boring or empty or threatening again. She'll certainly never have to hit 30, watch her tits droop, and accept the fact that maybe, just maybe, she needs to find something in herself to cherish and aspire to besides being pretty on the outside. Ironic, then, that in crafting this horribly thrown together, vapid little shitbox of a story, I found all the things that actually were the centre of me, and those equally two-dimensional characters have all flourished and enriched themselves alongside my journey. I'm still trying to reboot that story into something that will finally be worthy of love, because although its origins were dubious, it's grown and sprouted so much over the years, and those characters have kept me going through so much total shit. I think they and their story deserve the moon. After all, the things that mattered, and would continue to matter, even if I was 80 years old and wrinkled as a prune, that story taught me what they were. And for me, that was my ability with words, initially written, then spoken on here, sometimes even sung. I had discovered the seeds within my husk, the things that wouldn't wither away and leave me worthless before I'd even lived half my lifespan. I mean, God, I used to hate that damnable question in clubs or on dates. So, what do you do? I was either working jobs I hated and didn't want to talk about, or I was on disability, which gives you nothing to talk about. And when they asked what I did for fun, all I could say was, I come here to this club, which is not that unusual for young kids to be this simplistic. I mean, to shuttle from work to the weekend and back again with not much else going on, but it left me feeling entirely dull, that I had no deeper answer to that atrocity of a question. Once I started writing, however, I came to love that question. Any chance to launch into a rambling diatribe about my invisible friends, and the way narratives and facts and information just came flowing out of my fingertips as though I was automatic writing, as though my characters were really real, really were speaking through me, because I never ever knew half the stuff I wrote until it appeared on the page. It was true, pure magic. I wasn't a writer, I was a conduit. And my characters in those early days truly existed to me, always on my mind, always with me everywhere I went, making the world sparkle just a little more weirdly and beautifully. Soon the vampire band needed lyrics, which appeared on the page by the same unearthly magic, and then I tried to give them tunes, and before I knew it, I had 2 albums out, which I was at constant pains to explain did not really belong to me, were not really written by me, they were the property of the vampires, and they were not supposed to sound entirely like that. But unfortunately, I was the scribe, the only one of us with an earthly form, and thus my profoundly limited musical capabilities kind of had to suffice. What I'm saying is, in this rather round the houses waffle, that by the time I was about to turn 30, it didn't seem so bad, aging. I was no longer focused on the absolute terror of the loss I would inevitably suffer at the hands of time, that soon I would not be able to walk into a club and walk out having seduced anybody I liked. I think one of the biggest realization points for me was when I dated a 25-year-old at the age of 27, and on our first date he grilled me about my age before he'd lay a finger on me. I was humiliated, thinking he'd clocked me as an old bag, given I thought he was only about 22. Turned out he, at 25, was equally convinced that I was actually a teenager and was just trying to make sure he wasn't about to be jail-baited and or beaten senseless by my rather threatening-sounding trio of brothers. I won our little bet. I was the older, and only by 2 perfectly acceptable years, but that brief fling really brought it home to me. One day you will see those beautiful, beautiful boys in the club, only now they'll be too young to touch. Because if you do succeed in seducing them, they'll talk incessantly about university, about the first time they got drunk, and the chasm of years will yawn its unfathomable darkness between you, and you'll be sitting there thinking, in the words of one of my vampires who knows this pain far more intimately than I, "Dear God, you bore me. This is nothing more than glorified babysitting. There is no common ground here. There never could be. Your youth annihilates me. I've never felt so alone, so irrelevant, such a dusty sigh of worthless antiquity as I do beneath the glare of your infant eyes. Your youth annihilates me." So, there's that. The total dissatisfaction of age gap relationships, of the fact your stories are eons apart and they simply alienate and bore each other. And after that comes the second stab to the heart, the impossibility of age gap relationships. The fact that those beautiful faces you were once so wholly confident in striding up to and 5 minutes later you'd be making out, well, maybe you are the old bitch in the club now, because they wouldn't even look at you twice. The girls at their side look either model perfect or they literally look 12. And either way, you just know this is no longer your pasture. These are no longer your people. And then you get older still and fatter, as almost everyone does in time, and you realise you wouldn't even want to go to bed with a 24-year-old because you know how shallow you were at 24, how venomous and cutting the thoughts in your naive little mind about anyone who didn't look as effortlessly taut and skinny as you did. Christ no, who on earth wants to be in bed at 40 with stretch marks and rolls or loose skin and saggy bits alongside some fucking carved Adonis specimen who's barely seen anyone naked yet, let alone someone who looks closer to his mum than to his last girlfriend? Hideous, hideous thought. Absolutely no way I could, so to speak, get it up in that situation. Which, finally, at the age of nearly 40, leaves you with the depressing realization that you will now, almost certainly, never, ever, ever again have sex with a lethal face card. There will never be another boy in your life who looks like you stole him directly off a runway. And when your early dating history was as selective and blessed as mine, that's something of a shitty jolt, like a genuinely deeply unpleasant, yearning-filled shocker. It's not that I deliberately snubbed anyone who didn't look like some sort of fucking angel. It was, well, grey sexuality. I tried, in my defence, or perhaps this just makes me look even worse, but here it comes. At the age of 26, I tried to date a guy who was right in all the right ways. Nothing wrong with him, not even bad looking, I just didn't personally fancy him. I would be single forever if I didn't push through this insane pickiness, or I would end up married to a raging dickhead just because he was pretty. Something had to give. A personality was for life, looks lasted 5 minutes. Don't be shallow. As such, I threw all my eggs into the basket of Mr. Potentially Right, and sweet Jesus, it was awful. The sex was the worst intimate encounter I have ever had in my life, despite the fact that this guy turned out to be wallopingly well endowed. Everything was right, from personality right down to dick size, but if you don't fancy a person, trying to shag them is a simply horrible, horrible experience, probably mutually. After that night, I just had to let it fizzle out, so I was never forced to explain to him that he'd honestly been nothing more than a brutal experiment into the morality of asexuality, which ultimately had horrendously failed. And after that, I really did resign myself to being single, probably forever. And such it has gone, bar one long-term fuck buddy and one alcoholic-era mistake so atrociously heinous I have erased the entire shit show from my memory banks. Sometimes it's hard to remember after such a long time single, but genuinely, the wrong person is always worse than being alone. Just get a dog, for fuck's sake, if you're lonely. Don't settle for Mr. Wrong for you. Haven't enough of you seen your parents going at each other's throats with increasingly vindictive disrespect? Love lost, then trampled nightly in a boxing ring that was once a marital bed, the air thick now not with the scent of roses, but with the rankling stench of contempt, the sarcastic bullets spattering lovers' blood in all directions, and worse still is when one parent still loves the other. When one still says, I love you, and the hollow silence rings out and fades into the echoes of old age, until you realise that the thing you wrote when you were just 13, that I don't want to die alone and forever misunderstood, well, shit. All along it was a prophecy. It was and is fucking unavoidable. Because here are two people who married each other, who loved and fucked and fought and travelled and raised children together, and now it makes not a fig of difference where or when that parent dies, and whether or not their spouse is still gripping their withered hand as they slip from their long stint on this earth, because that hollow gesture of comfort will come with a side dish of cruel words and rolled eyes and sighs of exasperation, and they will die perhaps more alone than any hermit whispering nonsense to their silent bedsit, and they will die more misunderstood than any recluse who ever had the space to truly express themselves. Watching love die but be shackled together by circumstance until it turns cruel and bitter and hateful, and the more blood their words can draw, the more relief it seems to bring them. Christ, you don't want that. It's horrible enough from the witnessing platform. Single is lonely. Single is boring. But at least you'll never have to look at the love of your life and see the open contempt roiling in their silent, shut-down eyes. But I digress. Witnessing the fall of your parents' relationship as torn apart by age and weariness, that too is a part of ageing, I suppose, and a bloody depressing one at that. Returning to the subject of my own ageing, though, in a way it's strange that I'm not losing my shit over approaching 40. Because really, the last thing I knew, I was only 29. 33 tops. Now I'm nearly 40 and I cannot account for the time in between. Not at all. It's nothing more than a fever dream, a vile, half-forgotten nightmare. Not because time flies when you're having fun or anything so fucking trite, but simply because life will constantly surprise you, and most of those surprises will be more akin to a cat shit in your bed than to any charming pastel-bedaubed Easter egg. So, my 30s. For 2 of those years, I was a fat, miserable, broke, suicidal alcoholic. And then for 5 of those years, well, it's a seriously long story, too weird and involved and surreal to even get into here or probably ever. But all in all, it turned me from the person who wrote about vampires because they never aged and lived forever. And I wanted that too, wanted to be me here on this earth, in this life for 1,000 years. It turned me from that into a person who absolutely cannot wait to be dead and does everything in their power to live as riskily as possible, because anything that shortens this ungodly shit show of a life sentence has got to be a good thing. That's been the last 5 years. Overall, my 30s have been so bad I barely even remember them. Just a blood-stained pavement I've clawed my way along, leaving chunks of skin and hair and gore and soul and sanity behind. And at this point, 40 basically sounds like a relief. Maybe it'll all be new this brand new decade. Maybe it'll finally close this bullshit chapter and things will be new and good and beautiful again, even if coated in a few more wrinkles. The decade from 2005 to 2015, it seemed so quick, so smooth a crossing. I still felt like the same person, barely bruised by the passage of time. The decade from 2015 to 2025, however, has spanned eons, crossed hellish oceans of time, and the person who began that journey back in 2015 is most assuredly dead, irretrievable. The zombie form I stumble on in is unrecognisable in every way, and I don't think it's growth or maturity, life lessons, it's disfiguring scar tissue, plain and simple. My 20s were a happy little doodling in the margin of life, few tests to be taken. My 30s locked me in a gladiatorial arena until I had died 60 deaths and been torn soul from sanity. Of course I'm not standing here like Oliver fucking Twist, saying, "Please, sir, give me another helping of this thing called life, it's bloody delicious." Anyway, this is turning out rather more pessimistic than intended, because on the upside, to end the pessimistic section, of late I've started to realise some poignant and beautiful things about ageing. It's very, very strange still living in the city you've lived in for the vast majority of your life, still driving the same roads and seeing them so intensely changed yet so very much the same all at once. Then feeling your entire brain spin within your skull as you realise the memories and times that feel close enough to touch actually took place 20 years ago or more. Like the gas station where in the year 2005 I always used to pull in to snort cheap amphetamines off the A to Z. It's still there. The road looks the same. I traverse it endlessly. But these days no one younger than me even has an A to Z in their car, let alone knows how to use one. And the last time I drove past that gas station, there was a posse of teenagers filming a fucking TikTok dance on the forecourt, and I thought, how bizarre. How alien. This is another world and I have crash landed in it, or maybe the old world has simply been swept away like sand granules beneath a crashing wave, lost and scattered and never to be seen again. But if you drive on past that gas station, you can still have the same songs, Aerosmith, Amazing, or perhaps Blind Man, anything off Big Ones. Always my coming home music circa that year. You can still have them playing, and the road will still curve round to the right, approaching the biggest intersection, and the lights of the city will snuff out as one in your rearview mirror, eclipsed by absolute countryside blackness, and the road will curve on, flow on, in darkness and glittering cat's eyes, and for that brief spell of time, there's nothing but the road and the night and the music, and for a moment, nothing has ever changed. You could very well be 20-something still, immortal, because in the darkness of the night, no one can see the lines on your face. You're just a floating brain, an experience in a jar, nothing more, nothing less. In the words of my vampires, it's like the scent of horse sweat, the thunder of hooves, a quintessential thing in which time is rendered irrelevant, a moment of the pure comfort of unchangeability. A horse will always smell like a horse, from the battles of the Roman Empire right up to the present day. It's timeless, and that chunk of road, perhaps, will always remain the same as well, too dark and lonesome to be peopled with teenagers and their fads or any form of change at all. Something else that comforts me are the pieces of the past I can still revisit, dig my fingers through like cool sand at the beach, wriggle down into and feel young again. For me, that's the captured media of my 20s, the stories I wrote, and yes, even that abysmal first draft. I could never share it, would never ever want to, but I still love to reread it. Because it reminds me of precisely who I was, what I wanted, what my dreams were made of as a young person, and such small, tame dreams they were, ultimately. My characters may have been gravity-defying vampires, but all I really wanted from them were clubbing buddies who wouldn't ever die or become depressing, unrecognisable, child-rearing aliens to me. All I really wanted was a partner in everything, forever. Isn't that what everyone wants at the heart of it all? Such small fucking dreams and still entirely unrealised. The other thing is my music files. The many, many vampire songs that never made the album cut. Media files no one's ever heard but me. Some of them the painfully earnest attempts of a 24-year-old trying to imagine the mind of a 200-year-old immortal. And some of them the gleefully facetious punk nonsense of that same 24-year-old channeling the particular immortal who was determined never to grow up. Those songs take me back to a place and time that was quite lovely, before all the shit rained down, before the stage curtain of life was torn away and I saw far more of the back rooms than anyone ever fucking ought to. Before I didn't want to be here anymore, essentially, but you couldn't pay me to go back. Because, after all, if I went back, as lovely as that would be, I would inevitably have to go forward. And the notion of living the past decade all over again is enough, I think, to send the strongest Navy SEALs screaming all the way to the asylum. The third poignantly weird thing about aging is the point at which TV shows and movies are no longer about you and your generation. As a 20-something, I was horrified by the notion of actresses who had for years played lead roles, been lusted after being the star, the main character. And then one horrible, dark, inevitable day, they would go back to their agent for potential roles and be handed nothing but mothers and aunts. Suddenly they were background characters, beige supporting roles. You had officially aged out of sexy, aged out of relevant. You were no longer the main character, for you had a wrinkle on your forehead, and as a result you were null and void in worth to the entire world. Isn't that the lie that we sell women everywhere? You get male sex icons into their fucking 60s, but women, never. You can be funny, you can be profound, you can be brilliantly cutting and cantankerous, but an aged sex goddess? Never that. Maybe someday. I hope so. Even as a viewer, though, the experience of watching movies twists sideways in the oddest way as you grow older. Some people can watch the same movies they grew up with, only now they start fancying the father figure instead of the love interest. For me, I still see those movies in the same light. They were of my era, and I watched them as a young person, so I still step into the protagonist's comfortable shoes. But new movies, those are a sort of yearning sigh of brain-spinning nostalgia, all the young love and innocent fumbling for words, all the moments you know you will never ever have again, but sometimes, in the dark gleam of certain actors' eyes, I see exactly the people that I once lusted after or fucked in some opalescent 4 a.m. haze, and it's simultaneously lovely and agonising, watching all that reflected there, in the gleam of that stranger boy's expression, a boy young enough to be my fucking son, knowing that I am pushed back now, relegated, for the centre stage has been taken up by a strange new generation, sucking on their mango-flavoured fucking vapes, clutching their iPhones full of unthinkable apps, and all I have to be grateful for is their weird obsession with Y2K stylistics, which brings at least a hint of familiarity to the scene, and a hint of intensely welcome relevance to my own life experiences. Anyway, to reach my ultimate point here, because really, we could waffle on about this stuff until the end of time, couldn't we? Human experience, I mean. But to have some sort of point in this, I suppose it is to say, if you fear aging, you must find something to place value upon that time cannot rip away. I mean, if you want to be pedantic about it, time can and will rip away everything. Dementia is a cruel, cruel beast, and absolutely any talent you possess or foster can be lost to it. But you can't live your whole life in fear of that. Placing any value at all upon your looks, however, is a doomed conquest, and if that's where you place all your value, then you, my friend, are fucked. Yes, skincare is better now, plastic surgery is less invasive, cheaper, better, but it still isn't invisible. And you need to remember that when you're comparing yourself to influencers and celebrities who seem never to age. There are the ones who can look 19 in a photograph, but the moment they move their faces, which oftentimes you don't see, you just see the photographs, the plastic surgery illusion goes horrendously awry. And there are the ones who you only see in flawless lighting, which can take 20 years off anyone. Losing your looks to a greater or lesser degree is sad but inevitable, and as such you need to find the seeds within the husk before it all withers away and leaves you screaming into the void. The talents that exist within, the things you will get to keep for more than a single decade. These are the seeds you have to find, and don't worry if you don't have them yet. I didn't until I was nearly 30, and I've known plenty of people who switched up careers and went back to uni in their 40s to find their purpose. It's an eternal process, I think. And finally, you must think about the people like Alan Rickman, aka Severus Snape, and Dame Maggie Smith, who really came into their power in the latter years of their lives. Maggie Smith, particularly, is unthinkable as a young woman. She was absolutely impeccable as the cantankerous, mischievous old biddy. It was, in all ways, her final form, though I truly suspect she didn't see it that way herself, because to yourself, you will always be the conglomerate of all the things you have ever been in this lifetime. They all reside within you. And particularly if misfortune assaults you in the form of ill health or weight fluctuations or wrinkles, you will see that as a temporary, unfortunate onion layer detracting from who you really are inside, who you really were all your life. But the world, in its final tragedy, sees only what's on the surface, just as your children will only ever see you as their parent, not the whole sum of a person you were before they existed. You might come with some fun lore, but it's just a weird side quest to them. You are the abbreviated 3-letter life-giving receptacle called Mom or Dad, and all your richness is forever stripped away. Such it is with life, and such it is with all people who perceive you. They catch you in a moment of time and believe it to be your entirety, which, in my opinion, cheapens and minimises you both in the most depressing way. Never forget that every older person you meet has been every single age below that number. They have been 1,000 things. They are not the illusion you see now before your young, narrow viewfinder eyes. And this being such, the second thing I suggest you collect to fend off the fear of aging is a person, or 3, who knew exactly who you were in youth and still knows who you are as you age. In this conquest, I have largely failed. Most of the people I was truly close to when I was young are dead now or gone, but a precious few remain, and to them I am more than a glimpse, more than a temporary wingbeat of time in whatever grievous or glorious state I presently reside in. That's all anyone can hope for in the end, I think, to be seen in their entirety. So the final thing I ask of you is that you plumb the depths of the older people in your life, grandparents and parents in particular, while you still can. because you never appreciate them and all the stories they hold until you're standing at their funeral. And those stories are being retold through someone else's filter. And then you realize in stark travesty all that you've lost and all that they've lost. All those stories and memories you could have smoked without the filter, could have drunk together like Long Island iced tea. And now those stories lie cold in their grave. And so many glorious words will never be spoken again. I think about that all the time, actually, about World War II in particular. How many gut-wrenchingly pristine, rousing, bizarre speeches must have been spoken in those trenches, and some of those men would have survived to carry them home, and then their impudent fucking grandchildren would have had no interest in hearing them, and 1,000 glorious wordsmiths died one by one by one on the wards of old people's homes, with no one realising they had a single rousing bone left in their withered carcass when, in fact, they held fire. I guess what I'm saying is, ageing is a bitch, possibly the ultimate bitch. But the way you come to see life, that really is the thing. That's what it's ultimately for, I think. Your perspective changes. Even if you don't have children yourself, the people around you will. And then they realise things and see things and pass them on. And you see the great tragic tapestry of life from the underside. And some things make sense and some things don't and perhaps never will. But it's an interesting experience. And that, I believe, is what we're all really here for at the end of the day. To paraphrase the great Bill Hicks, we are a universal consciousness experiencing itself through itself. This is just a ride. And on this mildly surreal note, I will summarise and tap out. Find the value in your interior landscape, not the pretty temporary bows life and genetics have placed upon your exterior. Find some people you can trust to carry your memory throughout the decades alongside you in case you ever drop it. Plumb the depths of your grandparents while you still can, and always remember, this is just a ride, an experience. Oh, and hold on to your fucking music collection. No matter how cringe you think anything you listened to in youth was, hold on to it, because it will always, always transport you back when you need it most. That and perfume, anything scented. Those, for now, they are our true time machines. So, thanks for listening. If you want more words, more stories, I've got 3 books out and 2 playlists, all of which are linked in the Dropbox below, covering subjects from EDs to addictions to social media and neurodiversity to vampires and weird sex addicts with car kinks. It's all there if you feel like checking it out. And with that said, I will leave you to your thoughts. Have a nice night, internet human being. Whether you feel old or bafflingly young right now, remember that you will never again be as young as you are on this day at this very heartbeat of time. Make the most of it. Carpe noctem. And if you're like me and you're sitting there thinking, oh God, I'm like 25, 26. I've always wanted to go to uni, but like I'm too old now. I'm too old. I've missed my window. That was something that had hung over me for years and years and years and years. And eventually someone said basically this to me. They said, you know, you're as young today as you're ever going to be. You're never going to be this young again. And 26 is nothing. If you've regretted it until now, you will probably keep on regretting it as you get older and older and older. So just fucking do it. So I did. I went to uni and I started writing. I got what I wanted out of it. I started writing. And here we are. Yes, I have a fuckload of debt now. That's not great, but I don't think you can put a price on finding the thing that you value in yourself that won't be ripped away as quickly as your looks. Valuing something that gives you creative output and creative satisfaction and the pleasedness of productivity, and it feels like magic and all of that. You can't put a price on that, really. So if there's something you've been putting off because you feel like you're too old to do it, you're probably not. You're probably not. And if you don't do it now, you will probably look back in another 5 years and you will think, my God, you were so young then. Why didn't you do that? Anyway, this is a waffle. Books and playlists and all of that business dropped in the drop down box below should you want anything more. But thank you for listening. Over and out. Bye bye.